Yesterday, I had an impromptu interview with a man named Parrish, and Parrish has a YouTube channel entitled World A Stage, and you can go, if you haven't seen it yet, you can go back to the video that I dropped yesterday and see my interview with him, and you can check out his page as well. There's a link to it. It was um, well, I won't say dumb luck because I don't believe in that. It was by Providence, the mysterious call of Providence that I just happened to decide to stop by the public library, which I don't normally do. But I decided to go ahead and go there yesterday on this particular occasion to do some work. And as I was walking in, there was this character standing out front, and he was saying something into his camera phone, saying something about celebrities can shapeshift and they can become different heights and different ages, and he was just speaking very very openly about this kind of stuff that seemed very intriguing and seemed kind of up my alley. And so I listened to him for a second and even walked in the door of the library at first, and then I kind of opened the door, walked back out, and said, "Excuse me, I heard you talking? He was very nice. He was very friendly. He wasn't taken aback. He wasn't suspicious. All the things that I was afraid he might be. When some stranger comes up to you and expresses an interest in giving in interviewing you on camera. He was glad to do it. He was happy to do it, and I was happy that I was able to do it, because something that I wish I were able to do more on this channel is talk to other people, because number one, I think just hearing me yakety yakking all the time is, it's okay. I'd like to think that it's somewhat amusing and maybe even entertaining, and maybe even at times insightful, for those who subject themselves to it. But it's more interesting to me to talk to other people who have some interesting perspective, something interesting to say. The thing is, I'm not a very sociable person. Um, I am. I I don't know if you believe in the Myers-Briggs stuff, or I don't even know if I believe in it, but it checks out that I'm an INTJ. On all the things I've seen about what INTJs are like, it seems like that's me. So it kind of explains why I have so few friends. It can't be that people don't want to be my friend. I think it's just more that I would have a ton of friends because I'm such an appealing person to be around. But for the fact that I conduct I conduct myself in a way that makes me not be appealing to be around. Anyway, enough introspection. Um, I wanted to uh, use the interview with Parrish of World A Stage um, YouTube channel yesterday as a jumping off point to thinking about the whole issue of celebrity. Um, I don't know what I think about Parrish's ideas about celebrity shape shifting and all that. It's a little out there, but but like I told him in the interview, who knows? I'm willing to consider it at least. And interestingly enough, when I mentioned to him, when I asked him if he had any thoughts about Matthew Perry, he didn't see it. Wasn't really in his. Even though he did a lot of research and stuff on celebrities and finding others that they apparently resemble, that might really be them. because they're shapeshifters and they're immortal. So he found this vice president from the 19th century named Breckinridge, who he thought resembled Matthew Perry. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's interesting. They do kind of, I see the resemblance. I definitely see it. But I wasn't asking him about Matthew Perry with the idea of, who does he look like, or who else, who is he morphed into? I was sort of just, because seems interested in, looking behind, piercing the veil and looking at what's really happening, as opposed to what they're telling us is happening. I asked if he had any thoughts about the death, because it was a rather mysterious event, and it turned out to be the first that he'd heard about it. But he took it from there, and he took it in his own sort of way. But it got me to thinking about celebrities, and about celebrity in general, and about fame in general, and what constitutes fame, and what if something can be said, if it can be said that celebrities are not like you and me, which is what Parrish is saying in his own way. He was saying in a rather extreme way that they're not like you and me, that they're that the people you see on television, the people you see in the movies, the people you see visibly in politics, everybody that we know by name from the media, the prominent roles that they play in the media, none of them are of this. They're just of a totally different stuff than the rest of us. They're a different species than the rest of us. Now, I'm not willing to go that far, but I do wonder sometimes just how people get famous, and why certain people get famous and others don't. And something that I've largely come to a conclusion. I've come to a certain conclusion that's not as radical as Parrish's conclusion, but I've come around to believing that most of the time, if people are famous, they were raised or bred to be famous in some mode or manner. I don't claim to know how that happens. I don't claim that it's just it happens in the same way for all of them. But when I read and actually reread recently Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Unfortunately, I can't remember the author's name right now. And he's no longer with us. But this book that he wrote about the Laurel Canyon scene, which is where so much of American popular music was generated in the 1960s. So much of the music that from the radio as like 60s music came out of Laurel Canyon. 60s and even into the 70s music. If it was American, it came out of the Laurel Canyon scene, more likely than not. And the names are endless. And not only did it consist of musicians or bands, but it also consisted of course, actors. Because there's the proximity to Hollywood. Of course, Hollywood has been around, since like the 20s, I guess, for almost a decade now. but the music scene in Los Angeles didn't really exist until the 60s, when all these people mostly flocked there. And why do they go there? It became this scene, um, for mysterious reasons that have never really been explained. Because at the time, as the author explains in that book, and I'm sorry that I don't remember his name right now, please shout it at me, or leave it. If you want to leave it below and rebuke me for not knowing it, then feel free. Or for forgetting it, feel free. I often, uh, this is often something that happens when I'm recording videos. I forget names, names that I know well. But in any case, he makes the point that there was no music scene before that point, and suddenly at this particular time, when the whole hippie thing was happening, when the hippie scene started popping off in the mid to late 60s, there were suddenly these bands, there were suddenly these dancers, this group that were called the Freaks, that would show up at these shows and in particular clothes, dancing in these outrageous ways, and and they were highlighted in all of these high level media sources. Even though a lot of these bands weren't really that good, at least not at first. A lot of them, it just seemed they got together and they barely, some of them barely knew how to play their instruments, and a lot of their studio albums were done by studio musicians, and they didn't even play on them, and their live shows weren't all that great, until a little bit later, when they got a little bit more practice. But it all has this feeling of of being this very contrived scene. And David McGowan, there, it came to me. And the point that McGowan makes is also this, as if this weren't all weird enough. If these were just random people from all different walks of life, and all different kinds of backgrounds and so forth, then that would be strange enough. But he points out that almost every single one of those people in this scene are actually from families that are prominent in one way or another. Most of them, he points out, are military intelligence connected, and of course the most obvious case of this was Jim Morrison, the famous lead singer of The Doors, whose father was the admiral of the ship that was involved in the so-called Gulf of Tonkin incident, in which, as I understand it, nothing really happened, but they construed it as themselves having been attacked by North Vietnamese forces, and this became the reason for American involvement in Vietnam to be stepped up, even though it was almost certainly a provocation on the part of the U.S. military to put these warships in these particular places, and try to provoke a response. And even when there wasn't the kind of response that they thought would happen, they still said, "Oh well, Gulf of Tonkin, something happened, we were attacked, so now it's war, baby," and start reporting to your draft board, young men, and it all went on from there. So Jim Morrison's dad was the admiral that played a huge role in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. He was an admiral in the Navy, a high-ranking person in the Navy. And Frank Zappa's dad was in military intelligence, worked for a place that developed chemical and biological weapons, and the list goes on and on. So these aren't just randoms. These people who showed up on the scene. They're people who had either who were either from military intelligence or who had these bloodlines that were prominent, in the had retained this kind of aristocratic legacy. Even though this is America, we're not supposed to we're not supposed to believe in that kind of stuff here, but nevertheless, it happens. These bloodlines still have a lot of sway and a lot of pull here, just as they do all over the world, and so forth and so on. And so the point of all this is, I don't want to just get too into the weeds with this whole with Dave McGowan's whole thesis in Weird Scenes in the Canyon, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, but you get the impression from it that, oh, and also there was this huge base right in the middle of Los Angeles, not far from Laurel Canyon, where in the 40s and 50s they were making all of these films for military intelligence, and all of these actors and actresses, high-ranking people like John Wayne and Marilyn Monroe and Jimmy Stewart and others, had high security clearance to this top secret facility where these there was all kinds of sophisticated goings on involving film. So that raises the question: what was being filmed there? What was being done? What were these studios being used for? and so forth. And that building is no longer operational as a military facility, but it was operational into the, I think, into the 60s and 70s, if I'm not mistaken. So contemporaneously with the whole Laurel Canyon scene. So the impression that one gets from all of this is that these people got famous because they were from the right families, and they were chosen. They were picked out to be a part of this scene, which was largely artificially created, largely artificially contrived. Does that mean that the music is all to be dismissed? No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that there was no artistry involved. I'm not saying that that these people weren't talented. A lot of them probably were very talented. But here's the issue with talent. I know. I'm thinking of a couple people, but I'm thinking of one person in particular in my life. One person that I know very well, who's just the most talented person I think I will ever know. Just an incredibly creative mind, and a very engaging performer, and somebody that you would think would have uh, would be able to quote unquote make it, you know, and it's he's he hasn't quote unquote made it in the sense that these Laurel Canyon people have made it. He hasn't made it in the sense that most of what you hear on the radio is from by musicians who have quote unquote made it. I mean, I think he's done very well for himself, and I don't think he's got anything to be ashamed of. Please allow me to be clear here in what I'm saying. And there are other examples I can think of, but he's the most prominent example of somebody who's extremely talented. I mean, who's got more talent in his pinky than a lot of supposedly creative, talented people have in their whole bodies, and just hasn't been able to receive any traction. And what's his background? Well, his parents are not military intelligence, that's for sure. They're not high-ranking people in the government. They're not from some royal bloodline. They're not they're not nobodies, but they're not these they don't come from these kinds of positions of power and authority and control. It's just a standard middle class kind of upbringing. So he can't make it. He can't get any traction. And meanwhile, I don't know. I don't want to insult anybody who's famous. I mean, I could name names. I could take cheap shots. But I mean, I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to name anybody specifically who's famous, but who gets made fun of for being lame or not being very good or whatever. But I know that there are people who have gotten big, who have made it big, who have blown up, whether in the movies, on TV, in the music industry, or wherever else. I know people who have made it who I would put this friend of mine way ahead of them in every way. Does that mean these other people don't deserve what they have? I'm not saying that. I'm not. It's not for me to judge who deserves what, or whether these other people. I'm not saying these other people should be poor. I'm not saying these other people, they ought to. It's an injustice that they're successful. I don't want to indulge in that kind of negative, putting that kind of negative juju out there, if you will. I know that's kind of flaky way of putting it, but I think wishing destitution or wishing poverty on someone who is wealthy or successful or is not that's really not the best mindset. But I do think that my friend, I do think that there is some kind of cosmic injustice, you could say, in my friend not getting recognized in the same way that these other people are recognized. And of course, most of the people who go to LA don't make it, right? It eats up who go to LA with headshots and big dreams, and they slave away in waitressing or waitering jobs, while looking for their big break, and auditioning for commercials, and the whole that whole grind, it chews you up and spits you out famously. And we're talking here about a lot of talented people, a lot of good-looking people, and they don't make it either. So, all this again goes back to the question of what makes for fame, what makes some people helps some people be famous, what helps some people get their their talent noticed in such a way that they are put on a platform where they can be heard and where masses of people can listen to them and like them and want to buy their stuff and want to go to their shows if they're musicians, or go to their movies or watch their shows. Um, you know, it something tells me that the game is rigged, and I don't just mean rigged in the way like, oh yeah, well, if you've got friends in high places, of course you've got a head start. If you're a nepo baby or whatever, I mean something more significant than that. I mean, of course, um, accusations can be made, rightly or wrongly, about somebody like Maya Hawke, Ethan Hawke's daughter, who is on Stranger Things, in the cast of Stranger Things, and has been in a few other things. Like, would she have ever gotten noticed if she weren't Ethan Hawke's daughter? Um, of course, and there are plenty of other examples like that. But I'm talking about something more significant than that. I'm talking about, what David McGowan depicts in his book, which is the this whole scene where there was which was an instance of culture creation, apparently. Where they set out to create this thing that later got called, hippies. The hippie was created in a studio, and all these people out there, all these young people started aping the hippie look because because it was cool, and because they wanted, like Patrick Bateman, they wanted to fit in. So they started doing the hippie things and dressing the hippie ways and living, with the hippie customs and what have you. And plenty of others didn't. Of course, it didn't catch on with everybody, and a lot of people didn't like the hippies. But it was they succeeded at creating this scene, um, that kind of came out of nowhere and owed a whole lot to psychedelics, particularly LSD. And I've said this before many times, and I'm going to say it again. LSD is CIA. LSD is a CIA drug. LSD came into prominence because of CIA experimentation. LSD was used in MK Ultra experiments, and with the notion of making people more suggestible, make people, trying to create somebody who maybe could make the perfect agent, or maybe the perfect assassin, or whatever. you know and people are out there still thinking, oh no, LSD is just, it's an instrument for, you know uh, spiritual and intellectual liberation. you know I mean, I can't help but roll my eyes at that. uh like, how do you ignore the fact that the glowies, the ones in control, the most notorious of all the alphabet agencies, that they were the ones who first used LSD. And don't you think it's interesting that they were using it on both unwitting and unwitting victims to experiment on them to see what their reactions would be, and then later, in a lot of the places that they were working from, like Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, which is not Laurel Canyon but still California, a little bit, it's NoCal instead of SoCal, but that's where a lot of the hippies were emerging, was in Haight-Ashbury, and that's where the LSD, the CIA was doing their LSD experiments. That's one of the locations where they were running these experiments. So, it's not that I'm like drugs are bad. I'm not like that kind of guy. But really, with LSD, you got to look at this, and somebody like Timothy Leary. This is becoming more of a rant now, and I'm gonna conclude my thoughts because this has gotten a little long. I have a little more to say on this subject, but I'll save it for another video. But somebody like Timothy Leary, who is thought of as this guru of, this, he's so wise, and he's showing us the way. Tune in, turn off, drop out. Isn't that interesting? Like they don't want you to be engaged in anything. They just want you to just sit around and and be passive, and just sit there and have your grand visions, and be useless, while the drug runs through your system and maybe cripples your mental capacities for life. So he said, I give all the props to the CIA for coming up with LSD. The CIA gets a ton of credit for that. He said that. I mean, not in those words, but look up Timothy Leary on LSD and CIA, and you'll see the quote that I'm talking about. Obviously, this guy's not on the up and up. Obviously, there's something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Something is rotten in the state of California. So those are a few thoughts on fame and celebrity, and what makes for it. A bit rambling, but hopefully those who stayed all the way through. By the way, if you did stay all the way through, maybe leave a thumbs up with your comment to let me know that you actually stayed all the way through. Because I'm always curious when I make these longer videos, how many people really stick with it to the end. And I get the feeling not too many. So anyway, thanks for watching. Talk to y'all later.